hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, is at an all-time high. Nearly 10% of school-aged kids have been diagnosed with ADHD. Now, do you have a bright, creative child who struggles to focus or sit still? Maybe they even fidget constantly or have frequent emotional breakdowns. As a parent, your heart can break to see them struggle. And so you've tried things like behavioral programs, elimination diets, supplements, and even potentially medication. But you're looking for other alternatives to help support that are more sustainable. Well, we're here to talk about the nervous system and ADHD, specifically the vagus nerve connection in ADHD. So oftentimes people think about the brain-gut connection, and people will search for things for struggling with constipation or regulating their gut. But what's really fascinating is the vagus nerve is one of the primary nerves responsible for gut function. And so when this is skewed off, it can impact the gut, and therefore we can see some of the other things show up. So in a pediatric office, chiropractic office, it's common for us to have kiddos who come in who are struggling with constipation or other GI-like symptoms. And that's why they come in, but in turn, we start talking about things like emotional regulation or hyperactivity, and parents are wondering how those are connected as well. And so it's really great to see when the vagus nerve connects to so many different things. And so that's really because over 75% of all nerve fibers carrying sensory signals to organ function travel along vagal pathways. So that's huge. That's saying three quarters of sensory input is traveling along the vagus nerve. And so really this just shows that the vagus nerve is disproportionately influential in connecting body processes that are really critical for health and well-being. So when the vagus nerve is not functioning properly, how can you know? Well, some things that can indicate vagus nerve dysfunction would be things like insomnia or sleep difficulties, headache, fatigue, anxiety, gut issues, and poor focus control. So the vagus nerve is a critical messenger of signals between the brain and the body. The nervous system is comprised of the brain, the brainstem, the spinal cord, and the spinal nerves. And so that's how our brain signals to our entire body. Every organ, muscle, tissue, function in our body comes from the brain through the nerves. And so your vagus nerve being one of them. So it's directly carrying that signal from the brain to your organs. And that specifically regulates things that are within the parasympathetic nervous system, like heart rate, breathing, digestion, inflammation, sensory processing, and everything that helps your body relax. So when we see this vagus nerve superhighway going to all of these different things, develop dysfunction, whether that be from early trauma, chronic stress, or poor nervous system communication, children will just display hallmark signs of ADHD. Now, research clearly ties the vagus nerve to attention and focus challenges, hyperactivity, sleep, digestive disorders, emotional dysregulation, and more. And so if you have exhausted typical treatment options and you're looking for other options, especially natural ones to help support the vagus nerve, chiropractic and holistic options can be a tremendous amount of help. Now, this is why the vagus nerve is important. Essentially, when we look at things like tension or inflammation or physical trauma, even especially during birth, or infections, poor diet, toxin exposure, those are all forms of stressors. So those are all ways that we can put stress on the nervous system or dysregulate this nervous system regulation between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Oftentimes we talk about there's 3 forms of stress. And so we have physical stress, which in babies and infants, that's the birthing process. In kids, that can be, slips and falls, running around, especially we talk a lot about when they're learning to walk. Or in adults, that's posture or potentially even an accident, those kinds of things. Exercise is physical stress. So that's physical stress. The second thing we have is we have mental and emotional stress. And mental and emotional stress is important because we focus on maternal mental and emotional health during the prenatal phase. The prenatal period actually passes down to baby. So a lot of the higher levels of maternal stress while baby's in utero actually passes down to higher amounts of mental and emotional stress in baby. And then in kids, mental and emotional stress can come from they've had either a lot of physical trauma or a history of, when they were born, they had high levels of mental and emotional stress and their nervous system has just really never regulated. Or if they're struggling with these different things in behavior, it can create more signs of distress. So we have mental and emotional stress, especially we talk about, if the child is struggling to be able to participate or maybe getting feedback from peers, things like that too, that can yield into mental emotional stress. And then in adults, mental emotional stress is, our fast-paced lives, work, keeping up with kids, mental emotional stress. So we have physical stress, mental emotional stress. The third thing we have is environmental stress. This is when we talk about toxins or our environment. And so that's when it's things like anything our body is exposed to, our body is designed to filter. And that's why we have a liver and we have kidneys and our GI tract and our lungs and our skin. All of these things are forms for our body to filter things that we're exposed to. But this is just the form of environmental stress. So the higher the toxic load, the higher the stressful or the toxic burden. And so essentially saying the more toxic stress we put on our body, the more stress our body has to focus on eliminating all of that. Not that it's not able to, it's designed to do that, but it just requires more from the body. So those are three forms of stress. And so when we talk about this nervous system dysregulation or what skews us sympathetic versus parasympathetic, all of those things in any of those three buckets skew sympathetic. So specifically, when we're focused on long-term stress, it can really start to suppress this rest and digest or suppress the vagus nerve. So we have this bucket of all the things that contribute to stress. And what happens is it's this long-term exposure of that we're just constantly operating at this imbalance. We're constantly operating with high stress and low rest. And in adults, this makes a lot of sense too. We were just saying we're constantly trying to do more, constantly trying to be able to produce more, constantly saying, how can I get more energy through caffeine, etc., instead of being able to really take time to prioritize rest. And oftentimes that's just because of our lifestyles or you're a parent and rest seems a lot more difficult than just, choosing more time to rest. But it's this skew that we're just constantly, we're pouring and pouring and pouring, and then we have a low battery and we constantly have to keep going. That's this long-term, dysregulation that then suppresses this parasympathetic or rest and digest or the vagus nerve. And so that's really what we're focusing on, is we're focusing on protocols to focus on each individual's needs so we can strengthen the vagus nerve and be able to bring more balance. So one of the really cool things we can do in a nervous system focused chiropractic office is insight scans. Now, insight scans, we look at three different things. We look at a thermal scan for inflammation, we look at what's called SEMG for muscle activity, and we look at HRV for global dysregulation, or how stressed out is your body. And so the HRV one is really neat for us to see how skewed sympathetic your body is, or how adaptable your body is to stress. The more we're exposed to stress, the more our body is worn down, the less adaptability we have, or really bandwidth to really be able to adapt as further stress is put on our body. But what's really neat from an ADHD perspective is we look at what's called SEMG, or muscle activity. Now this scan shows us green is mild, blue is moderate, red being more significant areas of where your muscles are using a lot of energy to maintain your posture. And that really correlates to how much energy is your body using for a baseline. Now, specifically in something like ADHD, we see high levels of activity in the body at rest or at baseline. And so specifically, we see a lot of tension in the neck, especially in the neck extensors, in the back of the neck. But we have what's called this total energy index. And that's how much energy your body is using for baseline. And the more anxious we are, or the more kind of like revved up we are at rest, the higher this number is going to be. And so especially in kiddos, it's really interesting for us to see this number, to see how much is their body just dealing with at rest, and how are we able to decrease tension, decrease stress, regulate the nervous system, and bring down this resting energy level so that we really can help support their body and give their body sustainable support for just essentially their potential. So if you've ever been to a nervous system focused office, you can see insight scans. If you're in the Frisco, Texas area, come into Sunlife so we can scan you or your child, and we can see how much energy your body is using at rest, how regulated your nervous system is, and how we can support you or your child, especially when it comes to ADHD symptoms.